of how people react to things.
So what was the destiny of Knife Springs? 2015, we got healings.
Well, we had
Father
the healings.
Noel was the spiritual director of the priests and stuff that came here.
Right. He became a bishop then in 1925. He becomes bishop, and so he's got even more on his plate at that time, having to take on Notre Dame and a growing diocese that was going on. So, but the sisters are still plowing through. These group of precious blood nuns are taking on more and more and more responsibilities with more and more patients coming in. So I think that was one of the several factors as to why Our Lady chose this facility in particular to announce herself as Our Lady of America.
Why?
Well, there was the what I call the white martyr situation with the sisters who took care of all these patients.
So they were real players in caring for God's.
They died along with the patients.
So they got sick.
They contracted the same diseases and died along with them.
Okay.
Never complained.
Suffering to death.
They said thank you. They said thank you for the opportunity.
Wow.
And now they're lying in the cemetery over next to the building.
Yep.
And so I consider them to be the white martyrs. And it's probably why the apparitions began on the feast, on the eve of the feast of the North American martyrs.
Which were the
blood martyrs out of.
Right. It was in upstate New York. That's where my mother used to bring us kids during the summertime. Oarsville Shrine. The North American martyrs were the Mohawk and Huron Indians decided that they didn't want to trade with them anymore, so they stripped them of their clothes and then they ripped their skin and then they crucified them. And they called it the North American martyrs. And it was interesting. Why would that be associated with this?
Well, I just think it's total sacrifice, a giving of oneself.
Okay.
But these nuns didn't necessarily, give up blood, but they gave up their lives. So without the blood, they became white martyrs. And I didn't understand the concept of white martyrs. Oh, that's interesting.
You told me that. That's okay. There we go.
White martyrs are people who give, like Maximilian Kolbe.
Yes.
I don't know if they shot him or what. If they shot him, then he'd been a blood martyr.
I think they gassed him is what they did. I think he went to the gas chambers.
Well, I don't know if that would count as a white martyr or not, but I just thought it was the issue of the bloodletting.
It probably is. If the blood is like, I think you're correct. Absolutely correct.
Well, anyway, there was a lot of women who qualified as white martyrs that are buried out there, and I think that was one of the reasons that Our Lady saw that as significant. Another thing that I thought that was indicative of why she would pick this was the determination of the
mystical city,
the English translation, the confirmation, the what do they call those?
Imprimatur.
The imprimatur. That
nothing contrary to faith or morals, let it be read.
And this was the English translation, so it was the first time, it was in 1912. That you were able to read this book in English, because before that, it was always either in Spanish or German.
That's right.
And that's why so many of our priests and priest candidates in the seminaries in the late 1800s and all like that, and all through, they would always read German as a second. They had Latin, they had English, but they got German, so they could read some of the old texts that hadn't been translated yet.
That's right.
And this was one of them. And Father Havel was of that ilk too, although Father Havel read it in English, but he was raised in a German household too.
He could have written it. He could have read it in German. Yeah.
Well, he read it both ways. He saw that there was nothing wrong. He went and checked the accuracy from the German to the English.
What did he say?
He says it's there.
There you go.
It's all there.
Well, this Blatter that did the translation that was originally out of Chicago learned. He was brilliant in language. He learned Spanish in order to translate it from Spanish into English.
Mm-hmm.
And he read it in German, but he wanted to see the text in Spanish and then make sure that this thing was... So this was the excitement that I had, especially at the trial, because they asked me, my excitement is that Our Lady of America apparition is huge, but being connected to the books that will be used in the church to form the new priests and the nuns will be those documents. And the most profound, provocative introduction and invitation for people to come and to witness our lords and our ladies and St. Joseph and all of the different players, their hearts and how they suffered, how they loved Christ, and how, the different things that occurred. So our Lord invites us into his personal life through these documents. And this is why when I met Larry, I said that this thing is explosive. And it is. So here we are.
So there's a third element as to why.
Okay.
And the third leg of this stool, so we have the white martyrs, we've got the imprimatur that was given here for a work that she, I think, truly wants us to know. Because she says, basically, you want to know me, here's the story. Yeah. And this becomes very, very critical later on the Our Lady of America finding the divine indwelling.
Is that right?
We'll talk about that another instance. But, the whole purpose of Our Lady of America is for people to obtain the divine indwelling of the Holy Trinity. Because this prepares you then for life in heaven with the communion of saints.
Wow.
But the roadmap to get there is following the Holy Family's lead and their example, which is all covered in these books. So this kind of helps teach you not just like what the couple lines in the New Testament may talk about with the Holy Family. This gives you all the background. This gives you the coping mechanisms of how to deal with life and its troubles that come at you. The Holy Family did it right under very, very difficult circumstances.
Wow.
But they're trying to say, here's your roadmap. I know you need help.
Right.
I can't be with you all the time. Here, read, and then I can inspire you. So now the third element, though, is to, I think, why Our Lady chose the facility in Rome City there, the Knipe Springs, was, I think, because of, at that time, he was Archbishop John Knoll. He's one of the few archbishops in the history of the Catholic Church that was named an archbishop, even though he never sat in an archdiocese. Fulton Sheen, the same thing. He was made an archbishop for the same thing. They were both elevated to archbishops for defense of the faith at the same time, even though neither one ever sat in an archdiocese or ran an archdiocese. So they were always bishops, but they moved them up in regard.
So I've talked about this before. I went to the Shrine of the Immaculate Conception where a lady wants to be presented, but I went there.
In D.C.
In D.C., and there's a bust. It's in this book.
As you go down the stairs to the lower crypt church.
Yeah, I don't think I can find it. But there's a bust of John Francis Knoll. I stood by the bust. A friend of mine took a picture, and it's in here somewhere. But at any rate, the tour guide, I said, well, who is this? And she goes, I don't know. I said,
they didn't know?
I said, this is Archbishop John Francis Knoll. You wouldn't have the shrine if it wasn't for him. He was the one that had to dig into the money when it was all going away. So he was an apostolate of the Shrine of the Immaculate Conception. He actually saved it with the children and the people of Fort Wayne. They threw their money that way. That's why it got built. So how can you not know that, But Knoll, you're absolutely right on those 3 points.
Well, she was very pleased with that structure. It wasn't even done yet.
Was there a thing else she showed?
Well, and then one of the apparitions, apparently, she comes in and she shows Millie the completed structure. She says, tell my bishops I'm very pleased. They didn't even have it. It wasn't even close to being done.
Right.
But she's telling them in the future. This
is what it looks like.
Okay. But all this happened 58 days before Archbishop Knoll passed away.
Is that right?
He spent his last time, his active time, at one of his two favorite places. There were two favorite places of his. One was the Knipe Springs, because he built it and helped keep it going for that 56 years he was working on that. And then it was also in the National Shrine of the Immaculate Conception, which wasn't completed yet.
So he did not see that complete?
No.
And he did not see the apparition or know about the apparition with Millie?
No.
Okay.
Not that I know of.
But he paved the way for this whole thing, too.
Well, he laid the groundwork. The foundations.
So now Jim, I'm going to hold on to your next thought, but Jim Carrico decided to take an extract of these 4 books and put it into this book and to write it in an easier language as an introduction to the mystical city so that people would be drawn to it. And the imprimatur on this book is, of course, Archbishop John Francis Knoll. And this book was written by Jim Carrico. So, and I published it, but I never really methodically went through it. I'm starting to read it, and I'm thinking the beauty of what this book really represents.
Well, it's just a condensed version of this.
Yeah. And
this is the primer. This kind of gets
you going. This is the primer.
If you can stand that, you can get through this.
That's right.
Because I got to tell you, everyone I've talked to says the first volume here is the most difficult to get through because you have to learn
conception. I mean, how do you?
Well, and you also got to learn the pattern of her writing.
Right.
And you got to understand some
very
of the
poetic.
terminology.
It's very poetic in these and thous and different things.
Yeah, but once you get into the next books, I got a friend of mine just entered into book 2, and she's like, "Oh,
the
my gosh."
incarnation is explosive.
She's like, "I'm so happy I made it." It's like, you're not done yet.
Well, God bless her for sticking with it. And
well, she's going to grow from it so much. I said, "You're going to be more at ease."
Right.
I think with your spiritual life, and this is where we were talking about. So many people get involved in these cults within cults. The Catholics,
yeah,
who never get out of this spiral
right.
of questioning themselves and their quality of or the relationship. They're always like, "I'm not good enough. I'm not good enough."
I can see
You're fine just as you are.
Right. No, they really get all
beating yourself up.
It's almost like nervous energy, like a hyper anxiety.
Right. They're never good enough. They're always, there's something wrong with them.
And
there's
if you prick the bubble a little bit, you get a whole dissertation about, where they're heading.
Well, this bent up, what I would say, like insecurities. And they want to, fan their insecurities with more knowledge and details and facts, like the nerdy little kid in class. Well, yes, that's how it happened. In 1962.
That's right. They got all the answers.
They got all the details. Like nobody really cares.
That's right.
And it's a lot about how that trial went for us down in Indianapolis. They bored the shit out of this jury for 3 months. The jury could not have cared about most all that stuff, and I could tell by just looking at them. But they did care when I got up to talk.
Sure.
Because, man, they were on the front of their seats. They wanted to see what Larry was going to do. But we'll get to that. But it's the minutia to get all caught up in this, and it just bogs them down. So in 56, Knoll dies. Okay?
Knoll dies in 56 before the apparition.
58 days before the apparition.
Wow.
Okay, so he's barely dead and in the ground. And then Millie is at the property there in Rome City. And she gets attacked, I think, on the night before.
What kind of attack?
She was being physically attacked in her room by a spiritual demon.
Oh, my goodness.
I know what that's like, okay? So she's scared, and she has a situation, and she knows from her own background and history and thinking, by this time she's like early, mid-40s. So she's not an idiot.
She'd been around.
Yeah.
Not her first.
Yeah, she'd been, dealing with some of the stuff, and now it all got amped up a bit. And so now she's being physically attacked in her room, and she's afraid. So she goes to her Mother Superior there, and she goes to the chaplain, who's there at the time. I don't know the name. But she asked to be dismissed and released and allowed to go someplace else. And she says, "I want the hell out of here. Okay, I don't want to go back to that room." But they both tell her no, that she can't, that they need her there. This is her assignment. She needs to stay there. So she was really, really persistent about it. And they said, finally, it says, "Okay, you can go, but you got to get somebody else to cover for you here."
Wow.
So you got to get somebody else to come in from one of their obscure positions someplace to come and take your role here, and you can change out with them.
So what happened?
Nothing.
Nothing.
She goes back to her room, okay, and toughs it out. Okay, she doesn't quit. So she goes back, and she's thinking, "Well, who do I know that can come and change places with me?" So she goes back to her room, and she seeks help through prayer to help me get through this. Lord, protect me.
Sure, which is our only.
Somebody wants to hurt me pretty bad, that feel like it. Well, they wanted her to get out. Okay, and I know that feeling when somebody wants you out. And so she stays. The next night, what happens? The first apparition. Wow. So the devil knew what was coming.
Something was coming up.
Right. And she didn't.
I wonder how the devil gauges that event, that he sees something is starting to brew.
Oh, I don't know. I mean, they've got
a lot of spies.
Well, he's probably got his own ideas about what's going on, or I don't know how that part of it works. I don't fixate on it.
Okay.
You know, I don't worry. Sure. I don't worry about the bad stuff. I worry about and think about how to keep building things and making more.
That's all. Yeah, right.
You know, so if you don't, let your mind go to those areas, they don't affect you as much.
You let God's mafia group take care of them. So.
Right. I got people to handle that.
Yeah.
You know, I got people for that. I don't.
Vinny hit him with the bat.
Right. No, not there. Hit him in the other place I told you about. Yeah. Not in the knees. You know what that does? Nothing.
Right.
So anyway, Millie gets attacked, and the next night, she doesn't leave. She stays, and then the first apparition happens, and she meets Our Lady of Lourdes. And
what was that interplay? Do you know what she said to Sister Millie, or was there dialogue or any message? Do you recollect?
I don't know exactly what was said because I haven't read the messages. That'd be more for somebody like you. I don't want to, but I think it was just like an introduction. Here I am. I'm, this is who you're talking with. Okay, you're not imagining this. I'm real. I'm somebody you know. I am Our Lady of Lourdes.
Mother of God. Yeah.
Right. So this is who I am. And so then the next night, then she has another apparition, and this time then Our Lady comes again, but this time not as Our Lady of Lourdes, but she comes dressed then as Our Lady of America. And so she shows up, as everyone knows, the Our Lady of America image, holding the lily, trying to point to the divine indwelling of her own heart, that's there. And so she's trying to set the table for comfort when she comes to express herself then the next night as Our Lady of America, that she's like not having you explain that. She says, I'm the same woman you saw yesterday.
Okay.
But I want to tell you something.
So there's a transition going on, and so she can
accept it, right? She's being kind to this woman who's being put through the ringer, so to speak. It's not like you're totally comfortable with all your arguments at that point when one of these things is happening, because you're along for a ride. It doesn't happen all the time. So anyway, so she comes as Our Lady of America, and she says, I desire that my children honor me, especially by the purity of their lives. And so purity then takes on a real discussion point. What is purity? What is not purity? Everyone has their idea about it. But in my instance, Our Lady never said, bring me my Catholic children. She said, bring me all of my children. I have something for them here. I have a mission for them. And that is to live a life of purity. And that is basically, she's asking them to, she doesn't care about their sex organs and stuff like that. I mean, that's a part of it, but that's not the end all.
Those are the things that are drawing them away from it. One of the things in July of '54, just a small quote, my daughter, I am not loved in the homes of men. And because I am not loved, the divine Trinity refuses to dwell therein.
So this is Our Lady speaking to her, not Our Lady of America in that one. Our Lady of America didn't show up until 56.
Okay, that's right. It must be July the 11th.
She was already receiving messages.
So that was before.
Right,
okay.
But she had never had a vision.
Okay.
So the apparitions are a whole different level.
So they're kind of setting her up for the apparition.
Well, they're grooming her. She's being trained, to be a receiver of these things and understand when I'm talking to you or if the devil's trying to mislead you.
Absolutely.
Okay? But the devil would never call for you to pray.
Probably not.
The devil would never, everyone says, well, you don't know if the devil was talking to you. I said, well, when was the last time the devil asked somebody to bring people together on a regular basis to pray not just the rosary, but a full rosary?
Yeah, no, he fears the Blessed Mother, her name. He really fears her and her capacity and the power that Son, Christ, And the Trinity has given our Blessed Mother to really take him out and take him down. That's why he runs from her.
Well, he doesn't have any tools to go against her. You know, all he can do is mislead, you know, do the misconceptions, you know, do all these things that play upon your insecurities to make you do something that you might regret later on.
Absolutely. He knows our weak points, and he'll work on us for that.
Right.
So.
He knows how to be human more than we know how to be human.
Right.
Okay. And he knows what
the devil's got his arm around you.
Yeah. Well, it's like, it is one of those things. So, so we're at this point now with the 1956 apparitions that have gone on. So Millie at this point, she has several more apparitions at the facility, which the church now and the theologians have declared to be the central messages of Our Lady of America have been delivered now then at the facility in Rome City.
And does she have a spiritual director, and who is that person that's directing her?
Millie?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, Millie had a spiritual director, and I believe at that time she got hooked in with Father or he became Archbishop Paul Leibold. Right.
So as a priest, he was her director?
I don't know if he was a priest or what he was at in his stage, because I know I think he was an early bishop. Because wasn't he in Evansville?
I think he was a priest, and then he became Bishop of Evansville, and then Archbishop.
Yeah,
of
but I think he
Cincinnati.
was made a bishop early on in his career.
Was he? I'd have to look at it.
I think he was like an early riser. You know, like a lot of them, they won't even consider him until they're like 45. But I think he was a
could
bishop
have
before
been. My recall is that he was a priest connected with the Precious Blood Nuns down in Cincinnati, and then as he was directing her, he became a bishop and then an archbishop.
Okay, well that would make sense then.
So I mean, and it might have been very quickly that he went from being a priest to being a bishop in Evansville.
Well, I understood from just cursory review that he was a very intellectual, a very heavy intellectual.
Is that right?
Right, and that was one of his great gifts, and that was something he shared with like Noel. You know, that being this intellectual type that could think of big things at the same time.
Yeah.
And how they all fit together.
Yeah. Well, he was a serious player, and he knew what was going on. I mean, he very quickly discerned.
With Millie?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, he definitely knew, because he knew her beforehand, and he knew that she wasn't a powder keg. He knew that she was solid in her rituals, you know, in her formation. Because the gal had been formed since she was 13.
Imagine that. They're just babies.
But she came in with this sort of open tabula rasa sort of thing.
Clear.
All right.
Pure.
She was a valuable vessel.
Wow.
And she made herself available because that's all she wanted to do. So she was a good heart. She was an appropriate, I think, person to use for this. And what went on outside of that, you know, I really don't know, and I didn't get into that. I never knew her personally. I'm sure there's a lot of people who are going to be watching this that did know her, not just know of her.
Okay.
But there's a difference when you know somebody when you know of them.
Correct.
And because one is fame and, you know.
The other is real.
Right. And so she had that, and she didn't want fame. She wasn't after those things. She just wanted to do her job, get these messages to the bishops so that they could run with it. But then when you get it to maybe this bishop over here, who is not part of the dynamic of where the events actually took place, because the church has this big thing about geographical location and who was there and when were they there.
Right.
What did you know and when did you know it type of stuff.
Yeah, they take all their time on apparitions but they're very quick in terms of snuffing out, you know, the things that are happening to children and the laundering of money. I mean, this is nonsense.
Well, they have a playbook for all the different things that go on.
Do,
but,
don't they? Yeah, they really
well, we have to encourage them to do the right things when they're going to the playbook. So we've got all this going on with Leibold now being spiritual director for Millie, and she's confiding him in all this stuff that happened with Our Lady of America. And he is so on point with it and so believing of what she's told him, knowing the woman ahead of time and knowing that she wasn't, a goofball or tending towards these things. She didn't have money as an object in her thinking.
And her message of divine indwelling and living a life of purity certainly wasn't suspicious. I mean, it was
no, it
something
wasn't
that
troubling to
encouraged.
him.
That's right.
It might have been troubling for a lot of the other priests.
I bet you it was.
Because the other part of this message that was in there is that Our Lady was unhappy with the materialism of the priests.
This is why the mystical city is, they're kind of like push it away because it demands that they behave more properly and more holy in the conduct of the positions that they're in. They don't like it because it questions them in terms of their motives. And they can hide behind Scripture. There's a little bit of a wiggly-waggly room, you know what I mean? Can't hide behind this.
Yeah, I think it's kind of funny when they ask new priests a lot of times, like, what is your goal as a priest? Well, I want to do these things, this thing. Well, why don't you just try to follow Jesus for a little bit here first?
So, 101.
Before
Jesus
having these
101.
mission statements of what I'm going to do with my career as a priest, which a lot of times like, I want to build this, I want to build that, Well, why don't you start off,
That's right.
Let's keep our
Simple.
hours straight.
Right.
Yeah,
because I think it's what you said. A lot of it is, it comes from them or what I'm going to do. And it's, well, why don't you just serve God? Know, love, and serve God. That they used to teach us that, remember?
Like a lot of times all you got to do is just be there to answer the door at 10 o'clock on a Friday evening when, you weren't expecting anything. And here comes some people from, Australia showing up at your door saying, I have no idea why I'm here.
That's right.
Right. Just be on hand.
Right.
And a lot of
Which
people
for you, many times, that was
I was the only one there.
Right. Right. So thanks for the truth.
It was me.
We got anybody?
Yeah, I got nothing. But and I didn't know if somebody was going to shoot me, knife me,
Well, people bought
or whatever.
guns here.
Well, I had death threats. I had people upset with, what was going on, what was being portrayed. And I'm saying, look, I'm just trying to, keep the doors
Well,
open.
I do know you were threatened by a gentleman. We can get into that later, but I know that you were threatened that they wanted you out.
Several times.
Right?
Yeah. Well, they wanted me gone. And they wanted Millie gone. Well, that's why they threatened her and beat her the night before all this happened.
Okay. All right.
So the devil knows if he can get rid of you.
Right.
And he knew if he could get rid of me and if he could get rid of Father Havel.
Right.
That's why they came after us. And Father Havel and I both knew it. You know what Father's greatest support was for me at that time when he said? He said, Larry, he says, you got to know, they can't kill you.